The Antinatalist Advocacy Conference is coming back in 2025. Right now, that's all that we know of it, but you can have a say in design of the conference this time. Here's a Google form you can fill in. You can recommend the speakers that you want at the conference. You can recommend the topics that you want at the conference to be covered. And you can also mention any new formats that you want to see during the sessions of that conference. So please fill this form before 31st of December 2024. On a related note, Antinatalist Advocacy has added MSI Reproductive Choices to the list of charities that they support. MSI Reproductive Choices works on providing reproductive choices to women and girls. They also have an impact calculator to know how your donation could impact in real life. I tried it just as an example and found that a donation of $500 would save as many as 40 unintended pregnancies. Stop Having Kids had a table at Vegan Night Market in Portland, Oregon. Their Facebook post says, "We spoke to people for about 12 hours on and off over the weekend. We expected to get some pushback and were almost looking forward to it in a curious sense. But it never came. People were so enthusiastic about our message, and many felt a sense of relief to find out that they weren't alone in their thoughts and feelings." The connection between veganism and antinatalism was once more evidence, as they had put it. Although our message isn't super popular among the masses, it does get a lot of support in more vegan friendly spaces. Also, they are now accepting submissions for an upcoming page on the Stop Having Kids website for people's personal accounts of being child free. This section is where people give personal accounts of their decision to be child free. It's a place where people tell their stories and detail what being child free means to them. So if you're interested in sharing your story, then please email to childfreestoriesforshk@gmail.com. All stories will be published anonymously or under a name of your choosing. There is an event related to topic of extinction. Planet Titanic Human Extinction Café is an online event where they talk about the causes and consequences of the possible human extinction. This happens on first and third Sundays of every month from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Now, I don't know if they are for or against extinction or just want to evaluate the phenomenon and possibilities, but it's an online event on Zoom. I'll include the links to both the Zoom meeting and their Facebook post in the description. TVO is national television in Ontario, Canada, and it is proper mainstream media over there. And on that, Amanda Suknik and Lawrence Anton were invited to speak about antinatalism. The interview refers to David Benatar's book. They talk about what is the core of antinatalism, how ethical antinatalism is different than ecological antinatalism, about the benefits of existence, the possibility of changing one's mind, and so on. So, a huge congratulations to Amanda and Lawrence for doing this. There is one question that I want to address, though. Not that Lawrence and Amanda didn't answer it, but there is an opportunity to quote David Benatar on it.
Are you not glad that you're here, though?
So, being glad is usually taken as a feeling in this context, to which Benatar says, "If I am glad to have been born, a proposition to which many people would assent, is equivalent to it is better that I came into existence, then one cannot be mistaken about whether existence is better than non existence." The problem with this line of reasoning is that these two propositions are not equivalent. Even if one cannot be mistaken about whether one currently is glad to have been born, it does not follow that one cannot be mistaken about whether it is better that one came into existence. His point is that this feeling of gladness can change in different situations. There could be some temporary time when you might not feel glad to have been born. So that is not equivalent to whether it is better or worse to have come into existence. I think one can be glad to have come into existence. One could even be happy to enjoy life and yet have a view that it would have been better to not have been. The same question was discussed in another video by Lawrence, this time with John. This video was about awkward questions for antinatalists. It's more of a lifestyle video than a philosophical one, but really good points were made in there. Briefly, the questions they discussed were: do you regret being born, and are you happy as an antinatalist? These two questions we just already saw, and John and Lawrence also say similar things in the video. The other questions are more about antinatalists in relation to the world that they live in. Should you celebrate birthdays? What is your relationship like with your parents? Do you congratulate pregnancies? And how does antinatalism impact dating? This is an excellent way of addressing many concerns young antinatalists would have. So, thank you to Lawrence and John for doing this. David Benatar was interviewed on a channel called Brother Marcus along with Steve Godfrey. They discussed the difference between efilism and antinatalism, the definition of antinatalism, where David Benatar reiterated his definition of antinatalism. They also discussed the red and black buttons, extinction, pro mortalism, and the relationship of activism and academia in the context of antinatalism. Two very important points from this interview, at least in my opinion, were that one, David Benatar emphasized that his arguments for antinatalism apply not just to humans but to all sentient beings, and that in his view it would have been better if there were no sentient life. Second thing was more about whether antinatalism can be a mere description or does it have to be a moral prescription.
If there are some people that want to redefine or try to frame antinatalism not as a normative but as a descriptive, that coming into existence is a harm or a serious harm, and they grant that yes, we can have the ethical claim, but that antinatalism should include the descriptive because you need the descriptive to get to the normative. But if I just say that antinatalism can be the descriptive, would that be well, I don't know. Like, what are your thoughts on that? If I just say antinatalism is the view that coming into existence is a harm or a serious harm.
I'd be worried about that for a few reasons. First of all, because of the word itself. It's obviously we don't take the natalism part too literally. I did speak about that at one point, but the anti, so you against bringing into existence, that's more a claim about what you ought and ought not to do than a claim about whether coming into existence is harmful or not. And the other point is that people can reach antinatalist conclusions via other routes. So they can do so, for example, by a risk argument or by a non-consent argument. And that need not rest on the view that coming into existence is always a net harm. So I think it's perfectly fine to recognize that one route to antinatalism is this axiological asymmetry and its implications, including the view that it's always a net harm to come into existence, always in practice a net harm to come into existence. But then let's just identify that as a separate claim that is sometimes used and sometimes not used to reach antinatalist conclusions.
Thank you.
So, on this, I actually contacted Professor David Benatar. I asked him three questions. One, if we consider all these arguments, that is, harm to the one who is coming into existence, and this harm is serious enough to override the benefits it will bring to others, like parents or economy, and so on, and then the risk to their own life and the lack of their consent to come into existence, and then the harm caused by them to others, which is the misanthropic part, then we can recognize that coming into existence is bad. It is bad for the one who is coming into existence for three of the four reasons, and bad for others for that one remaining reason. Therefore, if we keep the semantics of the word anti aside, then can antinatalism just be a recognition or a description that coming into existence is bad? And secondly, about the word anti, which implies something we are opposed to, does it then mean that this is semantic reason and the idea that it is bad to come into existence is still constant, even though there could be different routes and reasons to derive this badness? And a third question I asked was, if this is the case, then what could be an appropriate term for the description that coming into sentient existence is bad? Those are the three questions that I asked Professor David Benatar, and he was kind enough to answer my queries. Before I go into his answers, just a little bit of bragging about myself here, because he said, am I correct in thinking that you are the cosmic antinatalist? If so, I have seen parts of a few of your weekly updates about antinatalism. You are providing an impressive service. My congratulations to you. So, thank you, David Benatar. This means a lot to me. So, coming back to the answers to my questions, the first thing he says is, I'm not sure that we can definitively, and the emphasis on definitively here is his, we can definitively rule out the term antinatalism to refer to the view that coming into existence is bad. He further says that it's instead a question about more and less reasonable ways of understanding the term. The view that coming into existence is a mere harm is very likely insufficient to count as antinatalism. The view that coming into existence is a serious harm is less implausibly viewed as antinatalist. There is a way to view the anti in antinatalism in the way that you have. So the question has gradations. It is not necessarily a binary question. But there's a difference because he further says, however, there is still a difference between something being bad and it's being wrong. For example, we can acknowledge that imprisoning a convicted murderer is bad for the murderer without thinking that it is morally wrong to imprison that person. Thus, I would not describe the view that being imprisoned is bad as an anti incarceration view. So, he's giving an analogy to make the point that something being bad does not necessarily mean that it is wrong. In the case of this murderer, it is bad for him to be put in prison, but we still think it is right to do that. And that's why just recognizing that imprisonment is bad for him does not mean that we are anti incarcerationists. Analogously, he says, I'm inclined to say something parallel about antinatalism, although I do acknowledge that it is harder, but not impossible, at least for consequentialists, to think that procreation is sometimes morally permissible even if it is a serious harm to the being who is created. Meaning that even if we recognize that coming into existence is bad, we can still think that doing that bad is right, and therefore mere recognition does not make us antinatalist. And he acknowledges that it is very hard to think this way. One difference between the analogy of the prisoner and procreation is that in case of prisoner, we think it is right to imprison him because it is bad for him to be imprisoned. As a form of punishment, we want something bad to happen to him, of course, in the proportion of the severity of the crimes that he has done. So, can we think of a scenario where we recognize that coming into existence is bad, and it is because of its badness that it is right to bring a being into existence? What about case of phased extinction? It is permissible or even right to have children until phased extinction occurs, but that is despite the badness of having children and not because of it. Similarly, if we make a case of economy that existing people are benefited by having children, and so it is right to have them, but even in that case, it would be despite the badness of having children. One scenario could be if we believe in the cycle of rebirths like it is believed in Hinduism. The life that you get to live now is a result of your deeds in your past life. So, for example, if you had done a lot of sins the last time, then in this life you'll be punished. So, having such a child is right because of the badness of having that child. There are two problems with this. One is that the badness is conditional in this case. If you had done wonderful deeds in your past life, but not good enough to achieve moksha or liberation from this cycle of suffering and rebirth, and you were not compensated for your good deeds, then having that reborn child is right because of the goodness that that child is supposed to enjoy. Secondly, and more importantly, this is mythology and not philosophy. So, what could be a realistic scenario where the recognition that coming into sentient existence is bad leads us to the conclusion that bringing that sentient being is right? Maybe there is such a scenario, and if so, please let me know if you can think of one. Maybe it is hard, and maybe that's why David Benatar started the reply by saying that I'm not sure that we can definitively rule out the term antinatalism to refer to the view that coming into existence is bad. But I want to thank Professor Benatar once again to provide this insight and a lot of food for thought. There was this article on artifactmagazine.com, Antinatalism, could this be the fringe philosophy behind the falling birth rates? Which, as the title says, tried to make a connection between falling birth rates and the growing awareness of antinatalism. The author Libby Cameron interviewed four people for this article. Anna, who is a 23-year-old master's student, a pro-natalist called Arya Babu, David Benatar, and Lawrence Anton. Both Lawrence's and David Benatar's arguments are covered to some detail in the article, and they are, as usual, watertight. But what about the connection between declining birth rates and antinatalism, or the ethical antinatalism that we are interested in? Lawrence provides some explanation with the background anxiety in people's reasons to not have children or have fewer children. Uncertainty plays a large part. It's a super unusual and uncertain time for a few reasons: climate change, instability of geopolitics, the rise of China, as well as wars in Palestine, Russia, Ukraine, and now you've got Trump in the mix. So that's probably providing a background level of anxiety. And then another big one, artificial intelligence. But David Benatar is not so optimistic. While birth rates continue to fall, David Benatar emphasizes the unlikelihood of true antinatalist future. There's a difference between mere reduction in the birth rate and the reduction to zero, as it were. It's not likely that the human race is going to cease to exist because fewer people are having children, just likely that you're going to have fewer children, and this will lead to societal change. And finally, there was also a metaphorical song by Mati Hairi running around without meaning and yet feeling nice about petty things like shoes. It was on the Exploring Antinatalism podcast channel.